Literally your house.
So we're not doing headphones.
Okay.
I just started recording. Hi, everybody. We are now doing a different format of the podcast where I was all excited because I brought headphones. We'll be able to listen to each other. That way, if the microphone didn't sound good, we could hear it. But Caleb doesn't like the sound of his voice.
Yeah.
Yours sounds better than mine, though. It's almost like my microphone
But you
sounds
wouldn't know
broken.
that if you weren't wearing the headphones.
That's true. So I'm the one distracted by it.
Yeah.
All right.
Digital simplicity and material simplicity.
Do you have the overview?
I can get the overview.
So we are in, we're talking about session 2. So the whole idea, like we did, let's say with Sabbath, we said stop and then rest and then delight and then worship. For this simplicity, it's digital simplicity, then material simplicity. I think next week is a type of simplicity most of us never think about, which is relational simplicity. And then we'd love to end with gospel simplicity. And so it's a little bit different, but I think it's really helpful. So these first two, I'll just say, yeah, all of them. I feel like they're so necessary for our moment. And have you gotten the overview yet?
It's like not.
Refresh. Because I updated it this morning.
There we go. That's weird. Okay.
Okay, so we're going to talk about all the things. Did you bring the notes for the Luke stuff that I declared in the sermon that we were going to do? The camera zoomed in on you, by the way.
Yeah, I know. I can talk about Luke. We'll say that.
Okay,
we can
cool.
talk about Luke.
How about you read the overview?
Okay. As Americans, our identities are often shaped by the quantity and quality of the stuff we own. Security, stability, and satisfaction are only possible when we buy and accumulate more wealth. And while we're really after deep contentment, we falsely believe that the very joy we're searching for is still on the other side of the next purchase. Cue our endless cycle of buying more so we can desire less. But Jesus offers us a better way. He does this by confronting our attachment to our stuff and our lack of trust in him, and also by modeling a life of simplicity. When we study the scriptures, we find a deeper truth than the lie we're trained to believe. Real contentment is actually found by limiting what we own and increasing what we give.
That was a wonderful summary.
Thank you.
How long did those take you again?
Couple minutes.
That's unbelievable to me, man.
I haven't
used,
used
write your book.
Yeah, I haven't used chat. Their temptation every week. It's a pride thing. Like I don't want to give chat GPT or any AI the satisfaction of.
Is that pride or is that, hey, I found a skill set, a gifting, a calling, and I have joy when I use it? Because productivity is not always the goal. It's almost like it's more of a sin to be more productive because then like you're robbing yourself of your calling.
That's a good point. I guess I never really thought about being satisfied from that. I think it's just, I'm just doing my job.
You're like, this wasn't fun.
What part of this sounds fun to you? Yeah.
See how you went back?
I know I did.
Your headphones on.
I would still be able to hear myself. I think it's okay. Let's put them on.
No.
Let's wear them.
No. Yeah. There's no way we're doing that. I threw mine away. So.
Okay.
You're keeping them on?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. This is a typical meeting, pastor staff meeting. All right. How do you want to start? We're talking about material simplicity. We actually began, let's talk about this. We began the message. I try not to have us re-preach the message. We already did that. So it's more like, hey, on top of bonus notes, I actually, this time, I need to bring it up in my sermon notes. I had so many extra notes. I just couldn't find where to fit it. And so I've been dumping it onto a different document. So maybe, yes, I have access to that. But one thing I think is worth talking about a little bit longer. As you know, towards the end of the week, I wound up changing my intro because I thought the Vim would be a good analogy, reminding them why we're doing the series in general, but also something like, why are we doing something like material simplicity? It there's a vision to it. So I've already explained my concept of Vim, not my concept, my understanding of Dallas Willard's concept of Vim. What are some ways you would describe it, how we're trying to do it in this practice, just in our church in general? Mm-hmm. You're much more poetic. Go ahead.
Yeah, so VIM stands for vision, intention, means. And it's Dallas Willard's paradigm for, you put the you put the headphones back on. It's Dallas Willard's paradigm for explaining how people change. And so everybody goes through a process of formation, right? Everybody's becoming somebody else. And so what we want to do is
you bring up a great point that everyone does this.
Everyone
this is not just a
right.
Christian thing.
Yes.
I didn't mention that at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that even that is a great starting point. Everybody, we talk about spiritual formation a lot at our church. It's sort of like a cornerstone of how we do our ministry here, because we believe that spiritual formation is not a Christian thing. It's a human thing, right? So to be human is to be formed by your environment, by yourself, by relationships, all of these things into a different kind of person over time. And so to intentionally form ourselves into the kind of people that we want to be, or the kind of people that Jesus calls us to be, created us to be, we need a process to understand how we get there. And so Dallas Willard gives us that by vision, intention, means. So vision is you have to see the picture of who you want to be. You have to know in your mind the kind of person, the changes that you want to see.
Which is like the value of mentors, the value of an inspiring message that paints a really good picture of somebody doing the thing.
And you mentioned Sunday, that's part of our job as preachers. When we preach, we're trying to cast the vision for what a better life looks like in the kingdom of Jesus, and how following Jesus isn't just the right thing, but it's the best thing. It's not just the right way, morally, ethically good, but it is the actual life-giving, better way to live. And so we cast that vision, and people hopefully catch a hold of that. They see, and I think Jesus does this in the Matthew text, like, don't worry about your life. That's the vision. Imagine if you were content with your life. Imagine if you didn't have to worry, you weren't anxious about anything. Imagine if that were really how you lived your day-to-day life. But you need more than just the vision. You need, next he goes to intention. And so it has to go a step deeper, where you say, okay, not only do I see who I want to become, but I actually desire at a deep level, a deeper core level to who I am. I desire to reorient my life to reach that goal.
I'm willing to go through the pain, the obstacles, the time it takes. Mm-hmm. Like, everybody wants six-pack abs.
Yes.
Not all of us have the full intention of going through changing how we eat, exercising so often.
And there's the reality is that we have conflicting intentions, right? We have the intention to have six-pack abs, and also the intention to satisfy our immediate craving for Oreos at night, or whatever. And so, like, you have to get to the point where your intention for the six-pack abs or whatever it is overcomes your desire or your intention for the lesser thing.
And that's such a great point, that we all have contradicting desires. Mm-hmm. And so when somebody, no matter what, you sure I sound weird on here, man. I'm telling you, I don't think this mic works.
This is how you always sound.
Wow. I'm encouraged. The whole idea is we all have contradicting desires. So no matter who you are, if you're like, man, I'm following my heart, it's like, even that, you're only following part of it, because you both want to be, skinny and eat a lot of Oreos. You want, Tim Keller's illustration about the man born in, as a knight in the medieval times, or today, two totally different desires. They're going to pick one, whatever society says is more normal. So I love that. So vision, intention, and then means is the way by which we actually attain that thing. Like, it's the practice.
It's the plan. Yeah. So the gym analogy again, like, you have to imagine yourself with six-pack abs. You have to want the six-pack abs more than you want the Oreos. But then it's not enough to just walk into it. You have to actually have a plan and progressively overload your body so that you're getting stronger, you're losing weight, you're building muscle. And so the means is that plan. It's the workout plan that'll get you from point A to point B. These are on our language, these are the practices that are the means to the end. And so the VIM literally stands for means. And like with simplicity, even with these practices, it's important to remember that these are not the end goal. These are the means to help us get to the end goal, which is becoming people of love, joy, and peace who are living for the sake of others rather than for ourselves.
And if it ever becomes the end goal, it is now legalistic. It's now self-righteous. It's condemning. It's
Project
pharisaical, or project self-care, just for me, myself, and I. And it's a really bad picture of what the disciplines can do. And that's why I think so many of us, we just rather not do them at all. Because it's like, oh, we don't want to be legalistic. But it's like, but you're doing somebody's practices. You're doing somebody's disciplines. Let's use the way of Jesus.
You already have a means. Like, the means that the person you are is the result of the means that you're living. So if you don't have six-pack abs, it's because your means is eating Oreos and not going to the gym or exercising or whatever for your whole life. And so when we talk about practices, especially with simplicity, we're really talking about counter habits that untangle you from the person that you are and then help shape you into the person that you want to be and that God has called you to be.
So I've been talking with my cousin who was on the podcast already for this, but he has this fascinating idea. He's thinking through how come minimalism took off so well. Many argue it's kind of dead now. Like maybe some COVID stuff. You know what? Forget it. I need stuff, you know, and maybe it's not a healthy thing. But for a while, you didn't have to be Christian, right? They were minimizing their life. And he's like, they used the diagram of Vim. They were painting a vision. And I think what makes minimalism so attractive is it looks attractive, right? Like a clean house with a really like nice aesthetic, like typically really white and clean and not cluttered. Just seeing the visual over and over, like, I would love to live there. Like, that seems like a really nice environment. That's, you know, so they have vision right there because it's tied to like how something looks like. And then the means, they were very good at like, hey, start with your junk drawer, then go to this room and then that room. And one of the biggest leaders of the minimalist movement that really began in 2008, coinciding with the recession, is Joshua Becker, who was a youth pastor for years, learned all of this from the Way of Jesus. Have you read The More of Less?
I've read Things That Matter. And I've perused The More of Less.
So something I really liked about his book, and The More of Less, is he is like, hey, this is a book for everybody, but I'm very influenced by the Way of Jesus. I thought it was really good. Like, I think it was non-threatening. And so he's like, hear me out. And then he gives an argument about, and I think this is the conversation a lot of us have with material simplicity. We point to the rich young ruler. What is that? Matthew 19, I believe. And it's that whole idea of like, man, when you come to Christ, you got to give it all away. Then he gives another illustration, though. Like, he calls people to different things according to their values, like how much they're attached to something, but also according to the purpose God has for that person, right? So like one example he gave was about like, you know, the message of the gospel is go preach, or another part of the message is follow me, like, leave your father and mother, follow me, walk with me, do life with me. And yet there's a story of a leper who was healed. And he's like, I want to go on the boat with you. I want to follow you. He's like, no, you need to stay. Tell your story, go to the priest, get clean, and tell people what happened. So it's like for that person, he's like, no, you don't follow me. Like literally, you need to stay home. You have a different purpose. Now, here's where we get nervous. Everyone's going to go, okay, that's not my purpose, right? My purpose is to keep more stuff.
Right.
But I think that story is still helpful to go, hey, this will look different for everybody. But it does take a lot of humility to realize I probably have to do something that I don't. The thing, it's like, I'll do anything but this. That's the thing you probably should do.
Yeah, it's hard too, because none of us think that we're materialists.
Right. And until you go on a mission trip, and then for like a month, you're like, oh man.
And then after that month, you're like, well,
Did you read Radical and get rid of your TV too?
No, but I did read Radical and I read Crazy Love and all of those. And I was really influenced by, it's funny. I was just thinking about Crazy Love actually the other day. And I was going to ask you, do you think we would, because I think we both kind of went through that phase of like, it was really profound for our moment and for each of us. And then we kind of came out of that a little bit and we were like, well, he got a lot of things wrong. It's too legalistic.
Right.
But now I wonder, like, would we go back to it? If I were to reread Crazy Love now, would I like it a lot more again like I used to?
I have 20 of those in my garage right now. Do you want one?
No, I have like 4 of them.
I was gifted a whole
to give away.
Box full. Yeah.
I
haven't read it in so long. I'm like, I don't know if I remember if I like agree with it right now. So that's the whole question you're asking.
Right.
Like, we come back to it after all this other stuff we've learned,
because it kind of
maybe
does
there's something there.
It gets to the core. What he does is he paints the vision, right? He gives you the vision of like following Jesus in our Western context today has become something that it was not meant to become, and we're not even aware of it. And so he kind of goes off the deep end and wakes you up from that. And he shakes you a little bit.
And that's some people's job.
Yes. Yeah. And then some people, like, I know he doesn't have a TV and all of that. And there's a lot of different ways to implement, I think, the core idea of what he was saying.
Well, then a lot of people have a regret saying, man, I got rid of my TV for 6 months. I sold all this stuff. But I'm like, but wasn't like, that was probably healthy in that moment. Like, yeah, it's cool that you have one again. But don't discount how that actually helped reshape your perspective. I think we always compare God's lessons he gave us 10 years ago and then we scoff at it. It's like, no, that's actually with our maturity level, our stage of life, that was exactly what we needed. If we try to do that today, that would be different. So I sometimes look at that, go back to my college self, like, man, I was pretty radical. Oh, I needed to be radical.
When else? In that, it's harder to be radical when you're in your 40s with kids and a job and all that. When you're a single college student, that I think is, and that's a part of why we do college ministry too, is like, that's when God gets a hold of your heart in the most intense and radical way for a lot. Of us. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, psychology and things like that, behavioral like development.
Is a part of being, life. And even like a part of being a man, which I really, my side project I want to start.
What?
I wanted to, no, I'm nervous though.
You can cut this out.
Okay, cool. A Create Men's podcast. Where I kind of do some of the musings on some of the books I've been reading, but I don't want to do it alone.
I would be a good counterbalance.
So because we exactly. But there's one author, I think it's the best book on manliness. But I don't want to say his name.
Is it Ronald Rolheiser's book?
No.
Oh, Richard Rohr's book. You were going to cut this out anyways.
No, I wasn't.
Well, I said you could cut this out, and then you said okay.
He wrote it back in like 2004, and I think it's like really good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
His late stuff, not good at all. I love how John Tyson put it. Like retro, how did he call it? Like retro roar?
Retro roar.
Gold. The new stuff, nobody read it.
Truth is truth, right?
Anyways, but he talks about how boys, they need to, they are more radical, and you actually are not supposed to squash that. You're supposed to just channel it, and so, a fun fact, I was discipled, mentored by the person that David Platt was discipled and mentored by. Do you know this?
I didn't.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, here's what's cool about it. This man, it's kind of funny because I see his imprints on the book Radical. Every day or every time we would meet, he would make you want to quit ministry. He's like, he would just make you doubt everything. That was his style. And then he would call you to just the most radical solution. And his whole job was to shake up the cage. And like talking to him post college, he's like, I just wanted to scare some of you away, because if that scared you, real ministry would have really scared you. It's like, he's my role. You had so many other great professors that did X, Y, and Z. You needed somebody to come in and just rally you. But that's not a great way to like always live, But he's like, you needed that in that season. And I was like, that is so true, right? And so, like, I'm really grateful the Bible was written in so many different ways. You have the Proverbs people who are just leadership principle. You have the poetic people. It's like, you got to listen to them a long time to figure out what they're even trying to get to, right? You have, I don't know. I love that I think we judge people's leadership styles. We judge people's communication styles when really they serve a purpose. Thank the Lord, it's not the only person we listen to, but it does help round us out.
And in a lot of ways, I think that's what we were trying to do. You were trying to do with your intro, is kind of shake people up a bit and show the weight of, I guess, how deep the roots of materialism go for each of us, not just in our society, but also even being members of our society, how we've adopted those same roots, and we're growing from those roots as well. And how simplicity is a means of severing our ties to that. And then
you brought us back.
Yeah.
Yeah. We spent, a new practice of mine is to look at the sermon, find the time stamps for us. But then you realize how much time you spent on everything.
Yeah.
And then it helps you go, okay, maybe next time, not this. But I was like, I spent 10 minutes declaring the case. Materialism has us all, but I think that was helpful because you can tell it made people go, when you first say like materialism, like, yeah. But then you're like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, I'm there too. It's like, that was the whole point of like unraveling. Anytime a church talks about anything about money or materialism, that stuff, it's scary, right? Like their guard is immediately up. And so we have to first admit where we go wrong, but also like, hey man, this is the air that we breathe.
Yeah.
What would you have added? What are some other stats or data or things that have helped convince you that materialism, really has a hold maybe on your life or on the church?
Yeah.
I love how we didn't end there. We went to a solution. And I think too often podcasters, sermon series, it's just about the problem. It's like, hey, there's actually a solution. It's a wonderful solution.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about the problem a little bit. What are some more problems you see?
Yeah, I don't know if I have any stats or data. I think I will. I think there's a temptation, and I don't know if anyone else is able to relate to this, but for me, when I think of materialism and where it takes root the most in my life, it's not so much in the large purchases, because I think that's what we think of the most is buying a new iPhone. It's like, well, if your takeaway from the Simplicity series is that you can live with an iPhone 11 for a little bit longer, then that's a great takeaway. But I think that the problem's deeper than that. It's one thing not to buy another, $900 iPhone that you really don't need because they added like one extra photo mode you're never going to use. It's another thing to instead, and this is for me, so I'm not saying other people need to do this, but deny myself non-essential impulse purchases that I didn't even realize that I make every single week. And I was just talking to Shelby about this yesterday, that I don't like, our issue is not that we don't splurge on anything big, but we do splurge on little things. Like every trip to the grocery store is incomplete without like an extra snack, or like a sugary drink that we don't need, or a book to my shelf that I know I'm not going to read, or like you look at like your bank statements and like where your money is actually going. And I think you realize like how tied we all are through our material, like are satisfying those immediate impulses to have something. Online shopping, right? You can order something on Amazon and have it delivered the next day. That scratches some kind of itch that I think we're all accustomed to scratching, which is it's self-gratification, not self-denial.
That's good, man.
And so when it comes to simplicity really is a practice of self-denial. You're denying yourself the felt obligation of buying something that you don't need just to solve an ache, cure boredom, or make yourself feel less lonely. And if we don't do it with digitalism, which we talked about last week, I think we do it with our stuff. And so it doesn't have to be big purchases like a new boat or whatever. I don't know what people buy. Like we don't buy boats, but we do buy like just we have something I realize we've had like an Amazon order almost like every week, just because, and it's like,
I should start out the sermon. Does your Amazon delivery guy know you?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. You know which one's coming on which day.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that.
And I think it's so kind. I won't say who. I don't think they'd have any problem. This isn't me talking bad about them all. In fact, it's brilliant. They have a cooler for their delivery guys. Like, hey, when you come in, like, have some water, have some Gatorade. Yeah. I was like, that's so nice. And then I told Jordan, I was like, I think we do that enough where we have to refill that every day.
Yeah,
yeah. Like, if they're actually taking that. No, I think that's a really good point. Looking at the bank account can be scary. I know there was a time in my life where I just didn't want to. My 7 in me was like, I just want to avoid that. Now I'm like looking at it every day, which also is another side of things where it can get unhealthy.
Sure.
But that's been helpful. It's the only notifications I have on my phone is anytime I buy something or my wife buys something, I see it. And then I look how to categorize it. Like I'm all about that now. It's being 30. Just wait. Okay. I think it's a 30s thing. That's another thing. I think me wanting to buy things has changed and increased for some reason. I think 30s is just a different stage of life compared to 20s. In my 20s, I wanted the new iPhone always. I had to get the new iPhone because I couldn't hear on it or people couldn't hear me. Like it just wasn't working anymore. And it was like a 10 or whatever. And I was like, okay, it's finally time to upgrade. But I didn't care about that as much anymore. It's the other stuff. But in that More of Less book, he talks about there's this couple who really wanted to get debt free and they just couldn't figure out why they haven't. And then they also, I might be mixing stories. It doesn't matter. Let's make up this fake person. They wanted to go on like a 10-year anniversary trip, but they didn't have the money to. And they're like, man, we're in debt. We're 10 years in. We can't even have money to go on a nice vacation. And they're like, where is our money going? And so they started at Amazon. They just went to Amazon.com, looked at order history. They tallied the last, I think it was 2 years, and it was over $10,000. None of it was necessary items. It was a small iPhone case there, little keychain thing here, air freshener. They're like, we don't need any of this. Like the 10,000 would get, pay off that car and we could still go on a vacation. It's all from just these little Amazon purchases, which is why one of the challenges, the experiments is, hey, what if you don't do an online purchase for 30 days? What could happen? Because what you'll notice is you didn't need those things in the first place.
Yeah, and then the invitation too is to examine. And I
Why am I wanting to buy this?
What is it about? Yeah, like I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example. Like an extra air freshener that you don't need. That's like, you know, you could settle for something cheaper, for example. Like, why do you, even that is there's so many things that we could settle for that don't cost as much money. And that really aren't going to last us any longer. Cause I think there is something about spending more money up front for things that are going to last you longer that you won't have to rebuy.
Yeah. And Richard Foster makes that point.
Mhm.
In many ways, simplicity is not equal cheapness.
Yes.
It actually means you're probably buying the little more expensive item, but you buy one and you treat it carefully and you don't have to keep buying a new one every year.
But it's, yeah. So, okay, here's a good example. Designer clothes costs more than something like I don't know, a t-shirt from Target, right? But that t-shirt that you are spending more for, that's a designer item, still comes from, and this wasn't anything we've talked about yet, but that still comes from a factory that is using child laborers and is not sustainable and is actually harming the environment. Whereas there's maybe another company that makes its clothes based on hiring workers that are, legally able to work and then paying them a fair wage. And then with materials that actually help the environment instead of hurt it, that's going to cost just as much as the designer item, both of which are more expensive than the Target item. But most of us are still going to go for the designer item because that satisfies the impulse to look better for other people, feel better about ourselves, whatever. Versus,
which goes a lot into next week's category, right? Relational.
Yeah. Versus spending the same amount for something that looks like it's Target, but actually supports, a better company or whatever. And so you're spending more upfront for something that's going to last longer.
I remember being so excited. And we talked about it. I got those $5 H&M shorts. Dude, like, why are these so cheap? And there's probably a reason, but those things broke in like a month. I was like, no wonder they were $5.
And that's another reason too. Like, you look at your order history, like there's just so much ingrained in us. Like, we replace things that we don't need. We buy cheap things that actually propagate things like human trafficking and slavery and things like that. And we don't question it. And then we don't make the connection between that and our discipleship to Jesus. So when we feel compelled,
this will be in our justice series.
A
little bit more, but
sure. Yeah, when we feel convicted or called to give financially to maybe to the church, to tithe, or to a project that we're doing or something like that, you're already trained to say no to that because you haven't learned to say no to using your money wisely and not purchasing these other things.
I want to introduce a line that I wanted to mention in the message and I didn't, just because, first of all, I think I had, there's such a thing as too many quotes. So I had to start scaling back. But I think I felt a compulsion to share a lot of quotes because I didn't feel like a moral authority on this topic. So there's something about that where it's like, guys, I am still unpacking how much materialism's a big thing for me. And it really does depend on who you hang out with. Some friends I hang out with, I'm like, dude, I am cheap. I am simple. And then I hang out with other friends. I'm like, oh, I spend too much money on Gatorade or whatever, right? But he has this line, John Chrysostom, which he was in like the 4th century, right? Didn't they call him like the golden tongue or something, like amazing preacher? Says, riches are not forbidden, but the price of them is. So, and I think that's helpful because I actually know some wealthy people that are very generous. I've been blessed by. They do have like a larger house, but they host a lot. The moment, let's say there's a fire or something, like they're bringing people over, they're fostering. I know people who have bigger houses, this is not true, but we need to be very careful making moral judgments on what people own. But the huge warning that we see in 1 Timothy 6 is be careful because many people have fallen away, pierced by many griefs. The root of all kinds of evil is the love of money. So they're not forbidden, but many of us don't have the capacity to receive that kind of blessing and not warp us from the inside out.
Yeah. And then you think about, now I have a book that I don't want to name the author.
Yes.
There's a help.
This will get us in trouble, man, but keep going.
Who we've said worse, I think. If we were going to get in trouble by now, it would happen.
I've gotten in trouble. But
have
going.
you? Oh, okay. What does that mean? In trouble? Maybe we'll save that for relational simplicity. Oh yeah, sure. Okay. Anyways, there's a book. There's a book about it's a book on how to read the Bible. And there's a chapter in it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So
don't mention it. Mention the content.
Sure.
But not
He mentions how a lot of Jesus's ministry was funded by wealthy women,
right?
Who followed him and then used their wealth, and that's how he was able to travel. Like, it wasn't like Jesus was not eating food, and not. And we mentioned this before. Like, he's had. Actually, I don't know if I've talked to you about this, but there's when he's crucified, the Roman soldiers cast lots over his.
Yeah, because it's so nice.
You don't cast lots over like a trash tunic. You cast lots over something that's actually worth something. And so we know Jesus wasn't a minimalist in the sense that he didn't own any items or he had tattered clothes and all of that. I think that's kind of our depiction of him, is he was super skinny because he didn't eat and all that stuff. He's fasting all the time, which is probably, that might be true. I don't know. But the point is that Jesus surrounded himself and I think called people to a point, his disciples, to sacrifice what they did have and be willing to part. I think that's the thing. It's
about attachment, idolatry.
Yes.
Joseph of Arimathea, he bought a nice tomb for him.
Yes.
It was only a 3-day lease, but it was nice.
Yeah, right. That's a good joke. That's a Baptist joke.
Boom!
My goodness. That's the one time I've looked to camera. Come on.
That's the only time you've ever said it's a good joke my whole life.
There you go.
We can end the podcast here.
All right.
Go ahead.
All that to say, I think Jesus was always surrounding himself with people who were open to being called up to detach themselves. It's the willingness to give up, because I bet the people that you're talking about that are wealthy would be, I mean, maybe not immediately, but just as content living a much smaller means because of their commitment to Jesus. If they lost everything all of a sudden, it wouldn't be the end of the world for them.
One friend of mine, I think he's the wealthiest friend I know.
Mm-hmm.
And he's very giving, but not just to anybody or anything. You have to really state your case,
mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that. But he has had so much suffering, just health suffering with his family. He's
mm-hmm.
I would trade this in a heartbeat because none of this stuff matters. Once your kid gets sick, it's a different ballgame,
mm-hmm.
And he's I'm grateful I can pay for the best doctors to really help them, yada, yada, yada. But so there's always, everyone's going through some sort of suffering. But the Richard Foster book opened my eyes. I think he says it in multiple books, but it's this whole idea. He goes, sometimes the people who love money the most are the ones who don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
So you just never know. You never know when people have a lot or nothing. It's just really, are they attached? Meaning, can they never live without it?
Mm-hmm.
And if they can't, that shows you're trusting in something more than Christ's provision. There's a lady at our church. I always have to be, they don't say you can share this on the pod, but someone had told me on Sunday, she's like, this was such a cool alignment by the Holy Spirit. Cause she said, I felt on Friday, she had been selling some things that she was just doing it to hoard up some cash.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, Friday, I realized I was about to sell a bunch of more little goodies. Because I'm just afraid. I'm afraid, what if I don't have enough?
Mm-hmm.
What if I don't have enough money for XYZ? And so with that fear, she's been selling things. And so she took those things and instead donated them to Goodwill.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was like, that's an amazing story. What a cool testimony. And then she's like, and now I come here Sunday and it's about material simplicity. She's like, that was a good affirmation for me. But this doesn't mean you don't save. This doesn't mean you don't be wise. Right? Yeah, help pay for your kids, volleyball and, college tuition. These conversations are so layered.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be.
Yeah. And then even then it's what, you look at where your money's going. What are you working for? That's another great question to ask yourself every day. Because Jesus still tells us to pray asking for daily bread. So it's not unwise to desire or want material goods to sustain you and to but I think it's key that I do think that it's telling he asks us to pray for daily bread and not give me bread for the week.
Yeah.
Give me bread for the month or for the year. It's like a consistent daily reliance on God's provision and then being okay if you don't get the extra things that you want. Yeah, there's a lot.
I want to add one more thing, and then I found the passage that I want us to talk about in Luke.
Okay.
At least holding to our promise a little bit. Go to Luke 19.
Okay.
But the other thing I've noticed, we talked about staying in the posture of gain will keep you in the prison of pain. And I think a lot of us are in the prison of debt. The average American is $15,000 in credit card debt. The average student loan debt is $37,000. I'm average. That's what mine came out to be. And we get 2 to 3 jobs to stay afloat. It robs us from family time. It robs us of quiet time. It robs us of being involved in church. And it robs us of being generous to people when we see them in need. Right. So this really does have a chokehold on us more than we know. And I think some of us are like, man, I'd love to be generous, but we never think to limit what we own, which will one day empower us to be generous. So that's a key idea. But we're in Luke 19. Luke has a constant theme about power and poverty and healing. You want to speak into that? I know we nerded out on the phone over this a couple weeks ago. I almost preached it, but I was like, I got some other things. Luke 12, what we eventually talked about. You were talking about like the theme of Luke all throughout.
Yeah.
And then
you're right.
I'll read.
I think, so my understanding of Luke, so all this is prefaced by, every gospel writer. The reason we have 4 gospels is because they're 4 different accounts of the life of Jesus. And they're all emphasizing different things. And so some of them tell things in a different order. And some of them include stories that others don't, and vice versa. And that doesn't mean that they're making it up. It just means that they're writing for an intentional purpose. And so Luke starts off his gospel saying, I'm writing to you, most honorable Theophilus, to give you my account based on my research of the life and the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth.
And many believe like he was funded by Theophilus, right, to go do this.
So what we know from Theophilus, or I guess what I know, I'm sure people know more, is that Theophilus was a person, and Luke calls him most honorable. So Luke is what he does throughout his gospels, he flips status around. And so Theophilus is a very high status, high enough status to be able to afford to hire someone for himself like Luke to go out, do the research, and then bring me your findings on this person named Jesus. And Luke is really concerned with showing how status in the kingdom, power, authority, wealth, all of those things is actually flipped. So, I think it goes from Theophilus to, I think it goes right into Herod, who was the most powerful, wealthy person. And then it goes to, if I'm remembering right, I think it goes to Zechariah and his wife, Zechariah was a prophet, and his wife, was married to a prophet. And so they're very high status. And then immediately it goes to Mary, who's just a virgin. She's not even married yet. So she doesn't have the reputation of being married and having a family and having wealth. She's like the lowest of the low. And she's the one who bears the person, Jesus, who is the most highest status out of everybody else. And then her song, right? Mary's song is all about how you've exalted the lowest one. It's all about, and so Luke, when he's writing to Theophilus, he's showing him how like wealth and materialism and power and reputation and status and all of these things actually work in the kingdom, in that it's often flipped. So those who have a lot of earthly power in this life, that doesn't mean they're going to have earthly power in the kingdom. Like Jesus said, the first will be last and the last will be first. And that's actually how all of this works out.
Thank you. So now we're in Luke 19.
Okay.
I'm going to read it.
Okay. All of it?
It's helpful to know. Yeah, why not? Let's do Bible time.
Yeah.
Not all of Luke 19, but the story.
Okay.
So it's helpful to know right before this is the story of Jesus visiting Zacchaeus, who was a wee little man, but also was a rich man. And part of his call was to give to the poor, right? So some really cool things here. Also good to know Zacchaeus made money a corrupt way. And so he was giving back.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Verse 11. As they were listening to this, so it ties in, right, to the Zacchaeus story. He went on to tell a parable because he was near Jerusalem. Why is that important? He's about to go die. Okay. And they thought the kingdom of God was going to appear right away. Therefore, he said, a nobleman traveled to a far country to receive for himself authority to be king and then to return. People know this is the story of Herod, right? Or Herod's son, Herodias or whatever, right? Okay. So they're like, oh, we know this story a little bit. He called 10 of his servants, gave them 10 minas, and told them, engage in business until I come back. But his subjects hated him and sent a delegation after him saying, we don't want this man to rule over us. This guy, Herod, was not a popular guy, so they're tracking with the story so far. At his return, having received the authority to be king, he summoned those servants he had given the money to so that they could find out how much they had made in business. The first came forward and said, Master, your mina has earned 10 more minas. Well done, good servant. Which you're immediately like, we all want to hear the well done from our master. He told him, because you have been faithful in a very small matter, have authority over 10 towns. The second came and said, Master, your mina has 5 minas. So he said to him, you will be over 5 towns. Another came and said, Master, here is your mina. I have kept it safe in a cloth because I was afraid of you. Since you're a harsh man, you collect what you didn't deposit and reap what you did not sow. I've always seen this as the master being Jesus, but Jesus doesn't reap what he doesn't sow. Right? He is not a harsh man. Right. So then you think, oh, this guy just has an improper view of this master, but his reputation precedes him. Nobody likes him. He's a bad person, right? I think this is also confusing because there are similar with faithful with few, faithful with much parables where the master is good. Like it is all about being a good steward, but this one's a little different. Okay. Verse 22, he told him, I will condemn you by what you have said, you evil servant. If you knew I was a harsh man, collecting what I didn't deposit and reaping what I didn't sow, why then didn't you put my money in the bank? When I return, I would have collected it with interest. So he said to those standing there, take the mina away from him and give it to the one who has 10 minas. But they said to him, Master, he has 10 minas. I tell you that to everyone who has, more will be given. And from one who does not have, even what he does have, it will be taken away. But bring here these enemies of mine, who do not want me to rule over them, and slaughter them in my presence. And then right after that, he goes into triumphal entry.
Yeah, into Jerusalem.
Okay. So, I was reading this. Apparently, people in not the Western perspective see this right away. We don't. We're capitalist, which I'm happy to be one, right? But there's every system. I love how you talk about that. Every system's corrupt. This just seems to be the best for what we can do. Let's not jump into that. But I've always read this wrong. I always thought the first two were good stewards, the heroes of the story, and the last guy was lazy. I want to push the ball off to you. I can keep going, but I've been talking too much. What is the crescendo here? Do you remember what we were talking about?
We talked about this. I want to preface by saying that I didn't read any commentary on this. So I don't know. Did you?
That's so true. Are we going to get in trouble here?
Let me preface by saying this is just based on a cursory observational reading of what's presented in the text, knowing Luke's integrity and purpose for writing his gospel.
And looking at context, like everyone knew this master was harsh.
Right. There's so many indicators in this text that the master is not Jesus.
Okay, yes. And because of the context before the story and after.
Right.
Which is why it's enough where I want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But this is a good example of our Formed by Scripture series.
Right.
We're trying to Haggah this text.
Yeah.
We're coming with humility. We might be wrong.
Yes.
But we do know this. The principle that you and I are coming away with is biblical. We just don't know if this passage is certainly that was the intended meaning.
Right.
And that's always a helpful thing to come in humility with. You can know a biblical principle because there are a bunch of other verses that support it, but it's still not being faithful if you take that and force it onto another passage.
Right.
That's eisegesis versus exegesis.
Yeah.
But we're trying to be faithful expositors here.
Yeah.
So yes, we're holding this with an open hand, but keep going.
So we often read this with Western eyes thinking that the master is Jesus, and the way that it works in the kingdom here on earth, if you're a follower of Jesus, is that if you have a lot, it doesn't matter how you've gotten that. If God has given you a lot, whether you've earned it, not earned it, whatever, your job is to be productive with that, meaning you make more for yourself and that will benefit the kingdom in some kind of way. And we look at this parable, specifically Luke's version of this parable, and we say, see, this is what happens. If you squander what God has given you, then you will be harshly punished. And God is capable of doing that because he's punished people in the past. You don't want to get slaughtered. I don't want to get slaughtered. So let's be productive. That's how the kingdom works. But what we've been talking about is how, because there's so many indicators in this text that the master is not Jesus, like you mentioned, the one who doesn't, be productive with what he's given. He says it's because you reap what you did not sow. I was afraid of you. You're harsh. And then in the end, the master is like, well, you're right. If you know that about me, then why didn't you think to do this instead?
True. So he agreed with them.
So he doesn't say, no, you had it wrong. Here's actually why I'm punishing you. He says, yeah, you're right. I am harsh. And because I'm harsh, here's what I'm going to do to you. I'm going to slaughter you and give what you had to someone else. And so outside of sort of the Western materialistic productivity minded culture that we come from, this reads more like the master was an evil person, and the righteous one was the person who didn't propagate the master's wealth on the backs of other people.
Just more context, I looked it up. It's the son of Herod, which is Archelaus.
Yeah.
So he's the one everybody knew, went away, came back with the kingdom, and he was a bad man. Mm-hmm. Nobody liked him. Okay.
So even hearers, people who are literally hearing this parable, watching Jesus about to go into Jerusalem, are able to correlate this master is not Jesus. This is the evil Herod that's built his kingdom off of materialism and possessions that weren't given to him by God, but taken by force.
Yes. So his way of making money was continue this corruption, continue to exploit the poor, and you're going to be rewarded. Mm-hmm. And Jesus is saying, okay, this is what we think he's saying. We're really being, we have to be humble here. But the last guy is the quote unquote hero. Mm-hmm. He refuses to participate in corruption, mm-hmm. even if it leads to more, because more is not always the right thing.
Right.
So the third man, he's willing to pay for the consequence of his conviction. Mm-hmm. Right. And so he was willing to be civilly disobedient because he believed in a deeper truth. Right. It's not just about more. And so he was willing to be punished because it was the right thing to do. Someone had said, quote, if you play along with their game, they'll reward you for it. The world takes care of its own. Mm-hmm. So here's another reason why we think what this is saying here, because Jesus is about to show I'm not playing their game of power. Mm-hmm. Matthew 4, I'm not going to rule the world the way the devil you want me to do. I'm not going to bow down. I'm not going to skip the process. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to do it with a sword. Mm-hmm. And that's what everybody in the rest of Luke 19, you have the triumphal entry. They're pumped because they're like, we finally have our war hero,
right?
Who is going to slaughter Rome. Mm-hmm. And he says, I don't play the game that they want me to play. Mm-hmm. Instead, I'm going to die.
Right.
I'm going to sacrifice. I'm going to choose the way of the lamb. Mm-hmm. And that's how I'll bring victory. But it's going to cost me everything. Mm-hmm. But then right? That's the crescendo. That's why I was like, this is really good.
That's because the parable ends with the righteous person who's unwilling to participate in the corruption of the wicked king being slaughtered. And then Jesus, the very next thing, slaughtered. Jesus walks into Jerusalem and he's about to get slaughtered.
During the Passover. He is the lamb coming in because he's showing he is the lamb. Mm-hmm. We're doing it the way of the lamb, not the lion.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And the lambs at this time are also coming in to get slaughtered.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like, this has to be right. That's some good gospel right there.
It has to be right.
Yeah. So what does that mean for us?
Yeah.
It's just like, hey, we have to remember, we have to be very intentional about our relationship with material possessions because the world is going to be promoting the other way, using and abusing, over trusting goods. The poor are going to be punished because of our own consumption. All of these factors. No, we're willing to even suffer for what's right because that is eventually what wins. But it's going to be hard because you're going to be rewarded being obsessed with the way that the world does things.
Yeah, it's the hold that materialism has on you isn't just bad for you, but it's bad for other people because it's built off of the backs of other people that aren't able to fend for themselves. And it's materialism. What it does is it focuses your attention back onto you, just like digitalism, right? Everything that you buy, every impulse purchase, every non-essential purchase, it does something to you unless you are very intentional about making sure that it doesn't do that to you so that you can then freely give to others. And by default, we don't buy things for others. That tends to be the exception rather than the rule. We buy things and accumulate more and more for ourselves with the benefit to others being like a secondary byproduct.
Mm.
And Jesus shows through this parable, but also throughout the Gospels, that that's not how the kingdom works, that there's actual satisfaction when your primary objective is to be generous to others, not accumulate more for yourself. In fact, simplify what you have so that you can focus on what's really life-giving.
So good. So let's end on some practical stuff. Richard Foster, in his book, Freedom of Simplicity, he kind of, one of his chapters gives like 9 tips. And I wrote down 4 because I thought, oh man, those 4 can preach. Wound up not preaching it, but
Got it.
If we were Puritans, I would have added it. That's a joke about how Puritans preached for like an hour and a half. Now, number 1, ask God about a purchase. And like he was saying, like, wait a week, like, you know, get some wisdom. A lot of us, we buy and then we go, Lord, should I have done that? Right. Yeah. So ask God about a purchase. Number 2, when you decide that it is the right purchase, see if God will not bring it to you without you having to buy it. I am currently praying for something right now. And I feel like it's cheating if I mention it. Some magical person's like, hey, let me buy it for you. But there's something that I'm praying for that I think will be a blessing to my family. But I'm like, I'm not going to buy it. I'm going to see if somebody, like, what a cool faith test. What if somebody just comes and gifts us that? It's so particular and random. I'd be like, what? Right. Okay. So that's 2. A third tip, stress quality of life over quantity of life. So we just talked about that. You know, some objects, they will cost more money. So it's not being stingy for the sake of being stingy. And then number 4, which is a huge one for me, make recreation healthy, happy, and gadget free. So one recreation for me that gives me life is playing basketball. So I've been cranking it up lately, mainly because I've just been kind of depressed. So I'm like, I need to go to the gym. That's, you know, neither here nor there. It's just random stuff in my life. I'm fine, I promise you. But basketball's been really fun, you know, and it's like good for my body. I'm able to meet new people. I'm like, this is such a great thing. We're trying to think through what does that look like with our family, yada, yada. Those are the 4 tips. I'm like, man, I think our people need to hear this because it's about joy. It's about living a life of hope and faith and endurance. You know, this isn't being stodgy and stingy just for the sake of it, right? It's an invitation to more by actually doing less.
Yeah, there's so much about like, when you start implementing these things, what they do is they call you to self-examination, right? So am I able to enjoy Sabbath without like my TV being on the whole day? Or am I able to enjoy, you know, like my day-to-day life without my phone at my hip or without buying something that satisfies a need, things like that. And they're all ways for God to meet those needs and give you actually deeper joy.
Well, I think this was a good conversation, and it was all because of the headphones.
It's a good thing I put mine back on then.
Thank you, guys. Make sure you comment. It's an hour-long conversation. Nobody gets to the point where I tell them, hey, comment. We get few comments.
Oh,
but also we get more listeners on podcast than the YouTube version. So
encouraging.
Yeah, we're very encouraged. All right. Thank you guys so much. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you next week as we talk about relational simplicity.